is the perfect time frame for a school visit, or is there one?
I don't know about, so in terms of length and things, so my assemblies are usually about 45 minutes, which usually is about 35 minutes of me talking. And again, I try to do a lot of slides and keep it interactive. I'm not an author illustrator, where sometimes I hear people get up there and start drawing pictures and all kinds of really fascinating things to keep their attention. So I don't have that luxury, but then allowing enough time for lots of questions. Kids ask, it's always fun. Almost every school, somebody asks a new question that I haven't heard before, and it's not just about, what's my dog's name or what kind of pizza I like, but what different elements of how you write your books. I mean, kids are smart and they're always looking to find things out. So that's the general time range. And then some schools I go to, and I've had schools where I've talked to the entire school in the gym in one session. I've had schools where I just speak to like the 4th grade and they split it up into 2 or 3 parts in the library and everything in between with grade levels and things. But I think it's great. I don't remember ever having any authors come to my school when I was a kid. And I think there's something about books that's harder sometimes for kids to get their heads around, the fact that there's an actual person behind this book that wrote it, and that being an author is actually a career, whether it's full-time or part-time, or a profession that you can have as a kid. And I think it's different than, not that it's the same, but somehow they can see musicians and other artists and movies and actors and things. It's easier for them to see that there's someone doing that, versus a book is just this thing sometimes that I read, and having them be able to see that this is a real person, and whatever way I might like to write or create things is something that might be within my reach is a good thing. And I think every kid is not going to identify them with that, but almost every school I go to, there's a teacher that comes by and said, well, such and such a kid, he asked that question. That's just incredible, because they usually don't pay very much attention, or they don't like to read anything, or it's really hard to get them, and they seem to be really into that. And they said, I'm going to run off and get that book. And like that's an exciting thing to see. Or when you get an email or a letter from somebody that says, my son doesn't like to read, and they love your books, and it's kind of inspired their love of reading again. I mean, what kind of other job do you have, unless you're maybe like a doctor or something, that you're going to get notes like that? So that's a very rewarding piece of it, that I think writing for kids, you see, it's the only experience I have, but I think it's probably more of that than if you're just writing for adults. It's a different kind of feedback that you get, which is fun.
Plus, I imagine it's a great opportunity to get some direct feedback from your target audience about what they like, what they don't like, how to engage them better with the next book, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always great to see how that, whether it's you speaking or even just talking about things, you can, if you're in touch with what they're saying and the way they're reacting, and or what their feedback, even their body language sometimes when you bring things up, that can be really helpful.
Something I've been wondering about, because I've been going out and speaking to groups, and again, it's all part of my scheme to get out of the house. But I've gone out, I've taught classes, that sort of thing. But every time I do that, and I maybe will, go to a Barnes and Noble, and 20 people show up, 30 people show up, and I think, well, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that we got to have this opportunity. I was looking you in the eye, and I learned quite a bit that I can't learn just online in my office. But then if I pull up my phone at the end of it, and that, would take me an hour, hour and a half to teach, 3 hours to teach some of these longer classes, plus the hour drive or 2 hour drive, all that good stuff. Not to mention the taking a shower, putting on actual pants, everything that goes into leaving the house and doing an event. But then I pull up my stats when I get home, and I see how the blog did, how the podcast did, how the books were selling, without me having to be involved. And I'm forever trying to answer the question just for myself: how much effort should I be putting into in-person events versus how much effort should I be putting into increasing my online presence, which is working for me 24 hours a day while I'm watching Netflix?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I would categorize a little bit more of what kind of events and activities are you trying to do. I think there's something beneficial to having diversified revenue streams. So if they're doing events, so you're not just dependent on, it's kind of like, should you go exclusive on Amazon for ebooks, or should you go wide? That's the big debate in a lot of the industry and things. So it's a little bit like that, but I think it depends on if you're teaching other writers, presumably, and I think sometimes that's where people get caught up, like that not that writers couldn't buy your books, but it's not necessarily the audience of who you want to read your fiction. Like they could read your fiction, but you know, unless you have a book about how to write, then maybe that could be a big uptick. But I think the way I look at it, and I haven't done, I'm interested in doing probably more speaking to writers and professionals about, you know, as another way to kind of do some teaching and things. I think that's smart to do. But I think you need to look at that almost as its own little thing that isn't going to have as much legs, but it helps diversify what you're doing versus if you're, excuse me, if you're speaking to a classroom, like that's 30 little potential readers there. It's almost like if you were writing, you know, fantasy books and you went to Comic-Con or something like that. That's more of you're speaking to your potential readers more than a group of writers. So I think, you know, figuring out which segment you're going after and knowing that this is more like consulting or something when you're talking to writers versus really drumming up more readers with schools or events or you know, conventions or things like that.
That's kind of my brilliant plan behind the podcast is I'm bringing a writers convention here to me a couple of times a week and learning as much as I can from people who are smarter than me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and that's doing a little bit of everything. And sometimes you use that to see what takes off, right? Whether if people are doing the books or school visits, or suddenly if people are loving the way you're teaching about doing publishing or the podcast, there's a lot of different things, and you can kind of lean into the things that seem to be having the most adoption. But sometimes you don't ever know that unless you try them. And then if you're in the position, which is a good problem to have, that there's more demand than what you have time to do, then you have to make some tough choices. But you're right. In a perfect world, I think we would all lean into the passive income of the fact that people are just buying so many of our books on Amazon that we just have to write them and then sit back and just watch the numbers go up without us lifting a finger. That's the easiest thing, right? And that's
when you figure out how to do that, you let me know. I'm going to be real interested.
Yeah.